In 1955, Britain was changing faster than most families could understand. Streets were quieter, wages were rising, and people were finally starting to look beyond ration books and shortages. A new question appeared in many homes. Could we finally buy a place of our own? Subscribe to the channel today for more stories about Britain's homes between 1955 and 1960. Many families still lived in terraced houses built before the First World War. Bedrooms were cold. Coal fires heated only one room. Smog from factory towns drifted into narrow streets. Yet there was a growing feeling that life was improving. The end of wartime rationing in 1954 opened a sense of possibility. New suburbs were being planned. Council estates were expanding. Building societies were lending again. Daily life was modest but steady. The BBC Home Service played in the background. Milk bottles waited on doorsteps. Children walked to school without traffic. Local shops sold bread, tea, and paraffin. People talked about wages at the factory, football results, and the cost of a bus ticket to the high street. For the first time in years, families allowed themselves to think about long-term plans. The housing market reflected this mood. Interest rates were stable. Deposits were achievable for the average worker. A semi-detached house in a growing suburb cost far less than most people today would imagine. New estates near rail stations attracted clerks, teachers, and young couples. These developments offered gardens, indoor toilets, and separate kitchens. They felt modern compared to older terraces and overcrowded rentals. Mid-century architecture appeared in newspapers and catalogues. Clean lines and wide windows suggested a new lifestyle. Families wanted brighter rooms. They wanted proper insulation. They wanted new appliances like electric cookers and refrigerators. Home ownership became a symbol of post-war confidence. Britain in 1955 was still recovering, but it was also rebuilding. The dream of owning a home was no longer unrealistic. It was becoming part of national life, and this shift would shape every street, suburb, and family decision for the rest of the decade. By 1956, the push toward the suburbs was impossible to ignore. Rail-linked districts outside major cities were filling with new families who wanted space, light, and stability. A semi-detached house near a commuter station became the ideal for clerks, teachers, and skilled factory workers. These buyers represented a growing middle class shaped by steady wages, predictable hours, and the promise of long-term employment. New estates appeared on former farmland at the edges of towns like Croydon, Watford, Ilford, and Bromley. Streets were planned with wider pavements. Gardens were standard rather than a luxury. Local bus routes connected families to the high street. Morning trains carried workers to offices and workshops, while children walked safely to newly built primary schools. The suburbs offered order and routine. Mid-century optimism influenced architecture and layout. Houses came with larger windows, brighter living rooms, and separate dining areas. Builders advertised modern kitchens with enamel units, stainless steel sinks, and room for an electric cooker. Families were drawn to these improvements because they felt practical and forward-looking. The contrast with cramped pre-war terraces was clear. The social atmosphere also changed. Neighbours exchanged greetings while hanging laundry on washing lines. Milk rounds and bread deliveries continued as part of daily rhythm. Women often managed the home full-time, while men took the early train with a packed lunch wrapped in greaseproof paper. The sense of community was strong and predictable. Building societies helped sustain this shift. They offered mortgages with modest deposits. Many young couples could now buy instead of rent. This access reshaped aspirations. Families wanted a spare bedroom, a patch of lawn, and a quiet street free from industrial noise. The suburb became the physical expression of post-war confidence. By the late 1950s, these estates formed a new way of living. They blended affordability, modern comfort, and social stability. The middle class was expanding, and the suburbs were its home. In 1957, council houses remained the most reliable path to stability for working families. Post-war estates had been built at a scale Britain had never seen before. Local authorities focused on giving ordinary people clean, solid homes with predictable rents and enough space for children. These estates shaped expectations about comfort and affordability for an entire generation. Most families moving into a council house came from overcrowded terraces or aging rentals with outdoor toilets. A council property offered something different. It provided indoor plumbing, proper ventilation, and a small garden that families could maintain. Living rooms were brighter, bedrooms were larger, kitchens had built-in cupboards, Belfast sinks, and room for a gas cooker. These improvements changed daily routines. Communities formed quickly on new estates in places like Stevenage, Harlow, and Kirkby. Children played on wide greens. Neighbours shared tools, helped with washing lines, and kept an eye on one another's homes. Streets felt safe and predictable. Rent was based on income, so families could plan their budgets with confidence. This financial stability shaped how people viewed housing as a right rather than a privilege. Many council tenants were skilled workers employed in factories, transport, or public services. They valued steady work and steady homes. A council tenancy allowed them to save money for the first time. It allowed them to imagine buying a home later. This step-by-step aspiration defined the 1950s housing landscape. Building standards on post-war estates were strong. Brick construction, timber frames, and insulation suitable for the British climate made these houses dependable. Even smaller details, such as coal sheds, dedicated drying areas, and shared green spaces, supported daily life. Council houses were not temporary solutions. They were long-term foundations for families rebuilding their futures. By the late 1950s, these estates had shaped national expectations. Space, warmth, and fairness became the standard that every family hoped to achieve. Council housing defined what a decent home meant in mid-century Britain. By 1958, many British streets still showed the effects of wartime shortages. Prefabricated houses, built quickly after 1945, remained lived in across England, Wales, and Scotland. These prefabs were designed to last only 10 years, yet thousands of families still depended on them because the demand for housing far exceeded supply. Their aluminium panels, flat roofs, and compact rooms reflected the urgency of the post-war rebuilding effort. Material shortages shaped every stage of construction in the 1950s. Brick supplies were inconsistent. Timber imports were expensive. Cement production struggled to match national demand. Builders often faced delays, forcing families to stay longer in temporary accommodation or rely on overcrowded rentals. This pressure affected prices. Homes that were completed on schedule cost more simply because materials had become harder to secure. Government rebuilding plans aimed to correct these shortages. Local authorities funded large-scale developments. The Ministry of Housing encouraged standardized designs to reduce costs. Streets of semi-detached houses and short terraces appeared on the edges of industrial towns and growing suburbs. These projects helped stabilize prices by increasing supply, but they could not erase the backlog overnight. Competition for new homes remained strong. Prefabs played a crucial transitional role. They allowed families to leave bomb-damaged areas and start fresh routines. Many had gardens, indoor bathrooms, and electric water heaters. They felt modern compared to older Victorian rentals, but their temporary nature reminded everyone that the country was still catching up. Families living in prefabs often hoped to move into a brick-built house as soon as new estates became available. Housing prices in the mid-1950s reflected this tension. Britain wanted normalcy. It wanted durable homes. It wanted predictable mortgages. But shortages kept the market tight, and government planning had to move faster than ever. These conditions shaped the cost of deposits and determined what families could realistically buy. The housing recovery was underway, but it was still fragile, and every decision in the market reflected that reality. In 1955, the price of a typical British home was far lower than most people imagine today. A newly built semi-detached house in a growing suburb often sold for $2,000 to $2,500. A terraced house in a provincial town could cost even less. These values matched the wages of the time. The average male weekly wage was around $10. A skilled worker earned slightly more. This meant that a home could cost roughly 4 to 5 times a single annual income. Deposits were calculated differently from modern practice. Building societies usually asked for 10%. A deposit on a $2,200 house could be around $220. Many families saved through post office accounts, Christmas clubs, or small deductions from factory wages. It took discipline, but it was possible. Some couples managed it within a year. Others needed help from parents who had lived through the war and wanted their children to move into healthier homes. Interest rates were stable through most of the mid-1950s. This allowed buyers to plan long-term. Monthly payments were predictable. Mortgages often ran for 20 years, and many families felt that the commitment was reasonable. A stable job at a local factory, railway depot, or council office was usually enough to satisfy a building society. Home ownership became accessible to groups that had previously relied on renting. The numbers tell a clear story. A single-income household could buy a modern semi-detached or a well-kept terrace without being overwhelmed by debt. Families budgeted carefully. They avoided unnecessary spending. Furniture could be bought through hire purchase. Coal deliveries were paid weekly. Savings were small but steady. This practical approach made ownership achievable for ordinary workers. The affordability of 1955 did not mean life was easy. It meant the market aligned with wages, expectations, and needs. For many families, this was the first time a stable, long-term path to ownership felt realistic. These numbers shaped decisions across Britain and set the stage for the suburban expansion that defined the rest of the decade. In 1956, most British mortgages were handled by building societies. These member-owned institutions operated with strict rules, steady lending practices, and a clear focus on helping ordinary workers buy homes. Their officials looked for stability rather than high income. A steady job at a factory, railway depot, post office, or council department was often enough to qualify. Applicants met a manager in person, presented wage slips, and answered practical questions about savings and household expenses. Interest rates in the mid-1950s were predictable. They usually stayed between 4 and 5%. This allowed families to plan monthly payments without fear of sudden increases. Mortgages often required a deposit of around 10%. Deposits were lower than today because building societies took fewer risks and lent only a portion of their available funds. They operated on pooled savings from local members. Lending decisions were cautious but fair. Most mortgages ran for 20 years. Payments were made through weekly or monthly envelopes. Clerks recorded transactions by hand. Borrowers often saved through the same building society before applying, which showed commitment and discipline. Couples planning to buy a suburban semi or a terraced house near a bus route often saved small amounts each week. These habits aligned with the financial culture of the time. The structure of building societies kept housing accessible. They avoided speculative lending. They barred high-risk borrowers. They evaluated each application based on stability, not aggressive growth. This created a housing system where families felt protected and understood. A reliable income was valued more than a high one. By the late 1950s, these institutions helped thousands of families move from rented terraces or prefabs into brick-built homes. Their cautious approach kept deposits manageable and repayments realistic. The building society model shaped the entire mid-century housing market and allowed ordinary workers to achieve ownership without facing overwhelming debt. Life for a 1955 homeowner followed a clear and steady rhythm. Families planned every expense carefully. Most households relied on a single income, so budgeting was a weekly task. Wages arrived in cash packets. Money was divided into envelopes marked for coal, groceries, rent or mortgage, bus fares, and savings. Homeowners tracked small amounts closely because every shilling mattered. Heating costs shaped the routine. Coal remained the main source of warmth. Families ordered deliveries from local merchants who drove lorries through suburban streets. Coal was stored in sheds behind the house. Homeowners lit the fire early on cold mornings. Only the living room stayed warm. Bedrooms remained chilly, so hot water bottles were common. Children hurried downstairs to dress near the fire. Furniture often came through hire purchase agreements. Shops on the high street offered weekly payment plans for dining sets, radios, and wardrobes. Many suburban homes featured mid-century pieces with light woods, smooth edges, and simple designs. Families owned only what they truly needed. Each new purchase signaled progress and stability. Household chores followed a predictable pattern. Washing days used copper boilers or early electric machines. Lines of clothing hung across gardens. Meals were planned around simple ingredients from local shops. Electric cookers and new refrigerators were becoming more common, but many homes continued to use gas ovens and larders. The BBC Home Service played during breakfast and supper, adding consistency to the day. Pride of ownership was visible in small routines. Homeowners painted fences, trimmed hedges, and polished front steps. Neighbours exchanged advice on repairs and garden care. Children helped carry coal or sweep paths. Families invested time because the home represented security and personal achievement. Many parents believed that owning a house would give their children a better future. By the end of each week, the routine repeated itself. Bills were paid, coal was measured, food was planned. Repairs were managed. This rhythm defined mid-century suburban life and created the sense of order that many homeowners valued. The house was not only a shelter, it was a symbol of stability built through discipline and daily effort. In 1958, many British neighbourhoods functioned with the rhythm of small villages. Suburban streets were quieter, and most families knew the people living next door. Children played outside without traffic concerns. They rode bicycles, skipped rope, and used chalk to mark games on pavements. Parents watched from bay windows or front gardens. The atmosphere was calm and predictable, shaped by routine rather than noise. Corner shops anchored daily life. They sold bread, tea, milk, newspapers, and biscuits. Shopkeepers knew customers by name. Families visited several times a week because few homes had large refrigerators. Purchases were small, local, and personal. Some shops extended informal credit to trusted customers. These relationships strengthened the identity of each street. Milk rounds started early in the morning. Milkmen placed bottles on doorsteps and collected empties. The clink of glass was part of the daily soundscape. Coal deliveries, bread vans, and mobile fishmongers added to this pattern. Services came directly to households, reducing the need for long trips. This convenience supported families who relied on one car or none at all. Neighborhood safety shaped social habits. Children walked to school in small groups. They passed familiar houses, hedges, and front gates. Parents felt confident because communities were close-knit. Streets built around cul-de-sacs or long terraces encouraged interaction. People exchanged greetings while sweeping driveways or hanging laundry. A sense of trust was common. Housing style influenced neighborhood character. Semi-detached homes lined with hedges created uniform, tidy streets. Terraced rows built before the war remained occupied but well kept. New estates added green spaces, footpaths, and playgrounds. These features reinforced the feeling of shared life. Residents took pride in their surroundings because housing provided both stability and identity. By the late 1950s, many suburbs resembled self-contained communities. Local shops, school routes, and daily rounds shaped a slow, steady rhythm. These neighborhoods felt connected because residents depended on one another and valued their homes. Housing was not just a personal investment, it was the foundation of a social world built on routine, familiarity, and community ties. By 1959, DIY had become part of everyday life for many British homeowners. Materials were still limited, so families learned to improve their houses using simple tools and careful planning. Weekend trips to hardware shops became common. Men repaired doors, painted skirting boards, and built shelves. Women chose fabrics, linoleum patterns, and curtain styles from catalogues. These small projects helped families personalize mid-century homes without large expenses. Post-war improvement schemes encouraged upgrades. Local councils promoted better insulation, safer wiring, and modern plumbing. Grants helped families replace old fittings. Builders offered low-cost services for re-roofing or adding small extensions. These schemes helped older terraces and pre-war semis stay functional during the rapid growth of the suburbs. Many families improved their homes gradually rather than relocating. The modern kitchen became the center of renovation plans. Homeowners wanted enamel cabinets, smooth worktops, and chrome handles. Early refrigerators appeared more frequently. Gas cookers replaced older ranges. A clean, organized kitchen signaled progress. Magazines showed examples of efficient layouts. Housewives valued these improvements because they reduced daily labor and made routines easier. Tiled fireplaces also defined the mid-century look. Many families replaced heavy Victorian mantels with lighter designs. Ceramic tiles in soft colors created a brighter, more modern appearance. Electric fires became popular because they required no coal and produced steady heat. These changes matched the new desire for convenience. Appliances changed domestic life further. Electric irons, Hoover vacuum cleaners and twin-tub washing machines sped up chores. Hire purchase agreements made these items accessible to households on modest incomes. Each appliance represented a step toward comfort and efficiency. DIY culture shaped identity. Homeowners took pride in their work. They discussed paint brands, garden fencing, and small repairs with neighbours. Renovations reflected the optimism of the decade. Families wanted homes that looked modern and felt organised. By the end of the 1950s, this culture transformed thousands of British houses into practical mid-century homes grounded in effort, pride, and gradual improvement. By 1960, the dream of homeownership had become a normal part of British life. Families who bought houses in 1955 were settling into predictable routines. Mortgages were manageable, streets were stable, suburbs grew steadily. The housing system matched wages, expectations, and the social structure of the time. Today, the contrast is clear. The relationship between income and property prices has changed completely, and the simplicity of the mid-century model has disappeared. Many of the features that supported affordability have vanished. Building societies once focused on cautious lending and stable deposits. Council estates offered secure homes at fair rents. Prefabs provided temporary relief during shortages. New estates expanded supply quickly. These conditions kept demand balanced. Families could buy with one income. Saving for a deposit was difficult but achievable. Monthly payments left room for everyday life. Modern buyers face a different landscape. Wages no longer align with property values. Deposits require far longer savings. Competition for homes is stronger. Supply is limited in many regions. The structure that made ownership accessible in the 1950s has weakened. Inflation, changing job markets, and new lending rules reshaped the entire system. The steady rhythm that once defined suburban growth has faded. Yet the 1955 experience still offers lessons. Families succeeded because the market was stable, predictable, and supported by national planning. Long-term building programs expanded supply. Local authorities played a central role. Lending remained cautious. Communities were built around essential services, public transport, and modest expectations about space. Housing was treated as a foundation for national recovery, not an investment strategy. The difference between then and now reflects how Britain has changed. Streets once shaped by milk rounds, safe pavements, and affordable semis now hold a different identity. But the core desire remains the same. People still want security, space, and the freedom to build a future. The story of 1955 shows that a fair housing market can exist when wages, planning, and lending work together. The price of a dream has risen, but the value of a stable home has not changed. The past offers a clear reminder: affordability is not accidental. It is created through choices, priorities, and the belief that every family deserves a place to call their own.